Today's daf is Chulin daf Kuf Yud Beis, and we are at the first wide line on daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. So, one of the hanachos of the sugya of Isser v'Heter, Taruvos, Basar v'Chalav, is that if you cook foods together, tam of one food is going to enter and penetrate the other food. And this is something that impacts halacha. Because just like you're not allowed to eat a chaticha, a mamashus of a davar asar, tam ke'ikr, you're also not allowed to eat the tam of a davar asar. It's for that reason, if somebody would cook basar nevela together with kosher food, you would not be able to eat the kosher food unless there was enough kosher food in this taruvos to be mevatel the tam of nevela that without question penetrated the food that you cooked it together with. Additionally, if you cook non-kosher food in a pot, you can't now use that pot and use it for something kosher. The reason is because just like when you cook food, tam is going to go from one food into the other food that's in the ketera. The Chachamim said that tam also goes from the food that you're cooking into the kedera that you're cooking it in. And as a result, this kedera now has in it blios of a davar asar. So if you're going to use this kedera to now cook kosher food in it, we're concerned that the blia that entered the kedera from the non-kosher food that had been previously cooked there is now going to exit the kedera and enter the kosher food that you're cooking in there right now. And as a result, that too is going to be a problem. So much of the halachas of Basar v'Chalav, Taruvos, Isser v'Heter is predicated on these two facts. Number one, when you cook food, there's blias and plaitas that are coming and going this way and that way. Additionally, those blias and plaitas have impact on halacha. What's known as tam kicker. Machlekes Rashi Rabbeinu tam kicker deraisa, tam kicker derabanan. Differences whether it's min b'minay, min b'she'inay minay. The halacha, the Mechaber and Simon Tzadik Ches, and the Ramah doesn't argue, is that tam kicker min b'she'inay minay is asim deraisa, min b'minay it's asim derabanan. But the point is that the sugyas of tam ke'ikr, which again make up so much of the sugyas that we're learning right now, is predicated on the mitzias of there being a tam, and that tam is aser. Stating that, one of the more important gemaras in these sugyas, if somebody ate fish on, or put fish on a plate that had been previously used for meat. So you have a fleishiga ka'ara, and now you cooked fish in that fleishiga ka'ara. Rav says, also loichlam b'kutach, you're not allowed to eat that fish now together with milchiks. Shmuel said, mutu loichlam b'kutach, that you're allowed to eat that fish now together with milchiks. Rav said, also, you're not allowed to eat the fish together with milchiks, nice and tamu, because you haven't eaten a tam of basar. How do you have a tam in basar? The ka'ara was fleishiks. Why? Because it was used with meat, hot meat. As a result, it hasn't a bli of basar. Now that you cooked or you put fish inside this ka'ara, so the bli of basar is going to enter the fish. You want to eat the fish now together with kutach, which is a milchig, it's a dairy meichel. You're eating basar v'chalav. And even though all you have is a tam, it doesn't matter. Tam ke'ikr, a blia in and of itself is going to be an issue. Shmuel says that this is going to be mutter. And even though tam ke'ikr, and tam ke'ikr may be dairaisa, and this is min b'shinim minoi, we're dealing with basar and dagin and kutach, stating that noisin tam bar noisin tamu. It's what's known as nat bar nat, meaning even though it's true, you have a tam, a blia of basar inside this fish, but this is already a second blia. It's a noisin tam bar noisin tam. How so? The mamashus of this basar was the piece of meat that was put on the ka'ara. The ka'ara only had in it a blia of basar. That blia traveled from the ka'ara into the fish. By the time it's in the fish, it's already a diluted tam. It's already a noisin tam bar noisin tam. It's a tam bar tam. It's already a second grade tam, so to speak. Why? Because it's already taking its second travel. It's its second stop. So it's true tam ke'ikar. But that's the pshat, that if you would cook basar and chalav together, so the tam of basar that goes directly into the chalav, that's going to be an issue. Or even if the tam of basar would go into the kedera, and then from the kedera would go into the chalav, that would be an issue. Because the tam that's inside the kedera is a tam rishon. Now it's going to enter the chalav. That's a tam rishon entering the chalav. Al zen nemar the halachas of tam ke'ikr. But over here, it's already a tam sheni, because it's going from the basar into the ka'ara, from the ka'ara into the dagin. By the time it's in the dogim, it's already a tam sheni, not a tam rishon. It's what Shmuel refers to as noisen tam bar noisen tam. It's what's more commonly referred to as not bar not. The point is, when it's already a tam sheni, it's already been diluted. In that case, it's going to be mutter. So not bar not is machlokes Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, it doesn't matter, not bar not. At the end of the day, you have a tam of basar. Went from the basar to the ka'ara, from the ka'ara to the fish. Right now, you can't eat the fish together with kutach. I don't care if it's a tam sheni by the time you're eating it together with the kutach. Shmuel holds, no. Nois and tam by nois and tam is going to be okay. So the Gemara, b'hadar Rav, meaning, even though everyone knows that Rav Shita is that not bar not is also, stating that Rav never said not bar not is also. And the whole idea that we know in the name of Rav that not bar not is also, which is the like Shmuel, it's a very big kiddush, was something that we inferred from a Maisa Shahoya Kachay. What happened? Rav Ikvel Lebei, Rav Shimi Bar Chia Bar Berei. Rav was once in his grandson, Rav Shimi Bar Chia's house. Rav had a son Chia Bar Rav, who had a son Rav Shimi. So he's by his einikel, Chashvein of his eyes were hurting. Abdullah Shaifa B'tzah. So he made him some herb in a plate. Basar Hachi. After they used this plate to prepare the herbs, Ramile Bishula Begava, they put cooked food inside it and they gave Rav to eat. Tom lay time of the shaifa. And when Rav ate it, he tasted the tam of the herbs that had been previously used for the medication. Amar, and he remarked, he said, Yov, time kulei. He says, wow. He said, these herbs were able to give such a taste that I can taste it in the food that I'm eating right now. Meaning, they had prepared this shaifa, this medication in this ka'ara, so that the shaifa went into the ka'ara, from the ka'ara went into the food, and now when Rav was eating it, he tasted it. Says the Gemara, that what did Rav mean when he said that? Yov time kulei. He was just saying it in the Velterai? No, he was probably coming to say something halachic. And what was he trying to say? That the tam that I taste right now in the food is a very, very strong tam, even though it's already a tam sheni. Even though it's a nois and tam by nois and tam. Why is it a tam sheni? Because it went from the shaifa, those are the herbs, into the ka'ara, from the ka'ara into the food that Rav was eating right now. Rav wasn't eating the plate, he was eating the food. So this is already a tam sheni. So l'chura, what he was trying to say is that a tam sheni is chashav. L'may nafkamina, dogam sha'alu b'kara, asu loichlam b'kutach. So says the Gemara that even though Rav never said it, b'ferish, but we know Rav's halacha of not bar not from this story. Says the Gemara, but it's not true. You'd never be able to prove the halacha of not bar not from that story. Because being that shaifa was very sharp, it was a very bitter herb, so it could be it's for that reason you would have not bar not. If Rav says the halacha of not bar not is usher, and he said it not only by something that's very maror, but even by food that's sweet, or it doesn't matter what kind of food it is. It must be the Rav must have said it mefurish, because I hear the premise to maybe say that this story was the Makar to Rav. The problem is that if this is where we're coming from, we would only know the halach of not bar not by something that's maror like the shaifa. We know Rav's halach of not bar not was way more inclusive. Thus, there must be a different Makar. Says the Rav Elazar Kamei the Marshal Rav Elazar was once by Shmuel. I see the Kamei Dagam Shalom Bakara, and they brought him Dagam Shalom Bakara. V'ka'achol b'kutach, and he ate it together with kutach. Right, that's what they brought him. They brought him Dagam Shalom Bakara. They wanted it, but he refused to eat it. Amalei. So Shmuel is the one that's feeding this to Rabbi Elazar. So he tells him, are you more frum than your Rebbe? Your Rebbe Rav would eat Dagim Sha'alu Bekara together with Kutach. Meaning he was makel when it came to a not bar not. Why wouldn't you? Says the Gemara, also the Kami de Rav. So Rabbi Elazar went to Rav. Amalei told him, Shmuel told me that you eat not bar not. I thought you're the one that holds Rebbe that not bar not is also. Were you chayzer from your halacha of not bar not? Amalei. So he said, Chasle lezare the Abba bar Abba. Chas v'sholem. That's another way of saying that. For the son of Abba bar Abba. Who was Abba bar Abba? That was Avur the Shmuel. So chas v'sholem for Shmuel, the lispele midid loisfirli, to give me food that I wouldn't eat. Meaning Rav said, of course I hold not bar not as aser. I was never chayzer. And this story that Shmuel told you that I once gave it to Rav, and Rav ate, it's not emes. Rav would have never done it because Rav knows that I'm machmer when it comes to the halachas of not bar not. Thus, it's not something that he would have ever done. There's a discussion in the poskim. If somebody has a chumrah in a certain area and you're mekel, so you think it's mutter, but you know that Pliny thinks it's aser. Am I allowed to serve Pliny that food without him knowing what it is? Because l'shitasa, he's eating a davar asa. But l'shitasi, I'm the one that's serving it. I'm the one that's doing the maisa. So maybe for me it's not a lifnei iver l'sita nichshol because I think it's mutter. Either way, this Gemara is one of the makairis that the poskim discuss. What exactly happened? Now Shmuel told Rabbi Elazar that I fed it to Rav, and Rav ate it, and Rav said it never happened. So what really happened? It's also a little bit unclear. I am bachroinim, but regardless, this is the machlokes Rav and Shmuel as it relates to not barnat. But the Gemara tells another story. Rav Huna, Rav Chia bar Ashi, Rav Yosfi, Chad b'haygis ademar b'desur, v'chad b'haygis ademar. So Rav Huna and Rav Chia bar Ashi were once sitting each on different sides of the river crossing in Surah. Lamar Aisile Dagam Shalu Bekara v'achal bekutach. One of them was eating Dagam Shalu Bekara together with kutach. He was eating a nat bar nat. He was being makel. Lamar Aisile Teinev Anovim Toich Hasud. The other person was breaking bread. He was eating a suda. And in the middle of the suda, they brought him fruit. They brought him Teinev Anovim v'achal. He ate it v'lei barach. He didn't make a special bracha. Mar Amalei L'Chavre. And they both were able to see each other. So they were both engaging in controversial, halachic discussions. So one tells the other, Rav Huna, Rav Chia bar Ashi, these are gedoyle amayran. So one tells the other, Yasma. Rashi says it's a lashon of beloy das. You're acting without das. Ovid Rabbi Chachi. Is this what your Rebbe would do? They were both Talmidim of Rav. Rav holds not barnat as aser. The other one told his friend, Yasma Ovid Rabbi Chachi. Is this something your Rebbe would do? If you eat fruit in the middle of a suda, the pas doesn't part to that, you're supposed to make a special bracha. So the Gemara says, the one told the other, it's true, my Rebbe Rav doesn't hold that not barnat is okay. But I'm going like Shmuel, who holds that not barnat is okay. It's true, Rav maybe holds that it's a problem. You'd have to make a special bracha if you eat teinav v'anavim b'tei chasuda. But there's a Reb Chia, the Tani Reb Chia, pas peiteres kol minei meichel, v'yayim poiter kol minei mashkin, kol minei meichel as the rabbis, even te'enim v'hano. Again, machlokes Rav and Shmuel is just another anecdote as it relates to the halacha of not barnat. Amar Chizkiya mishum abai. So what's the bottom line? What's the halacha? Hilchas adagim she'alu bekara muter la'oichlam bekutach. That if fish were prepared in a hot plate that was previously used to prepare hot meat, meaning it's a legitimate fleshige ka'ara. Now you put fish inside of it. You're allowed to eat the fish together with milchiks. Why aren't you worried about the bliya of basar that's in the ka'ara, that's now in the fish, that you're now going to eat together with the kutach? The answer is, it's true, there's tam, but it's already a diluted tam. It's a tam sheni. It's a noisen tam bar noisen tam. It's a not barnat. These are all synonyms of each other. And not barnat, the halacha is mutter. Stating that, Abaye continued, and he said that there are instances where not barnat is going to be awesome. And that is tzinoin shechatchoy besakin. We saw this a little bit quickly at the end of yesterday's daf, that if somebody cuts a radish or anything that's sharp, such as an onion, besakin shechatach babasar, with a knife that was previously used to cut meat, meaning it's a fleshige knife, also bekutach. It's going to be also to eat that snoin together with kutach. Now, even though at first glance this seems to be nois and tam bar nois and tam, it's the same not bar not. The knife is fleshig because it has in it a bliya of basar. The knife is not basar. The knife was used for basar, thus it has in it a tam rishon of basar. Now you use the knife to cut the tznoin. So the tznoin now has the tam. It's a tam sheni. You're saying that it's also to eat the tznoin together with kutach. What does that mean? That means that tam sheni has chashivos that you can't eat it together with kutach, even though it's a nois and tam bar nois and tam, even though it's a not bar not. And even though Abaye just paskin that dog them shalom bekara mutar loichlam bekutach like Shmuel, even though hilchas like Rabbi Yisuri, but over here he paskin like Shmuel kula that not bar not is going to be okay. But as it relates to tznoin shechatach besakin shechatach babasar, over there the halacha is also loichlam bekutach. But he qualified that. For Hani Mili said tznoin, that's only true for tznoin. The agav churfei bala, because slain is very sharp, and it's because of the sharpness of the tznoin that this is the way it is. That we say it's baileya from the sakin. Avo kishos, but something like squash, there you don't have to worry that it was literally baileya. What you have to do is you just have to wipe off the top of the kishos, and that's already enough. You scrape it off, and that's it. That's enough. Which in and of itself is a little bit of a chiddush, because ordinarily, if you're not worried about blias, all you'd have to do is wash it. You wouldn't have to cut anything off. But at the very least, that's something that you're supposed to do. Kilchi the lifta, if you use the fleshige knife to cut stalks of turnips, shari, there you don't have to worry at all. Rashi says something interesting. Rashi says because the turnips are sharp. Lefes in a charif, ela moslik. They ain't tam shum and nicker by, and nothing's going to be nicker inside of it. That's why it's going to be okay. The silka beets asiri are going to be aser. V'patach budalifta shapadami. And if you use the knife to cut turnips and beets, then even the beets are going to be mutter, because once you cut the turnips, the mesikas of the turnips take away anything you would have to worry about on this knife, and as a result, it's going to be mutter for the beets as well. But the question is, what's going on over here? I mean, how do you understand the two halachas of Abaya? I mean, Chizkiah said in the name of Abaya, not bar is mutter. Dogam sha'alu b'kara mutter la'oichlem b'kutach. And then in the same breath, he said, tznoin shechatchay b'sakin, shechatach b'basar, achsul la'oichlem b'kutach. And then he got involved with different types of vegetables. Is it a radish? What about a squash? What about a turnip? What about beets? Whatever. But the point is that the whole concept at first glance seems to be dead on arrival, because it's a nois and tam by nois and tam. What's the issue? You have a fleshig knife, so the knife has a blia basar. That blia now went into whatever vegetable we're discussing, and now you want to know if I could eat it together with kutach. So why isn't it a nois and tam by nois and tam? So Rashi asks the kasha, just pashut pshat in the Gemara, and Rashi says two pshatim, and this is very important halacha. The first thing Rashi says is that when it comes to a knife, we're more concerned that there may be something on the knife itself. Meaning, every time we talk about using a fleshiga plate to put milchiks inside on it, or dogam sha'alu b'kara mutar loichlem b'kutach. So we're looking at it from the standpoint of the blia. The blia that was absorbed inside the wall, something that the dishwasher is not going to take out, right? It's inside it. Is going to go from the plate onto the fish, from the fish into the kutach. Okay, so then already, on the nois and tam level, it's a tam sheni, it's a nat barnat. So there's a shita shmul that holds that nat barnat is not okay. But what would be if there was real meat? There was a little bit of grease, a little bit of fat. It just wasn't cleaned 100%, almost 100%, but not 100%. You have a little bit of be'en on the plate itself. Do you have to be worried about that be'en? So ordinarily, you don't have to be worried about that bad. All you're worried about is the blia. That's why dog mishal bakar is mutar loichlem b'kutach. Because if you were worried about the be'en is not a nois and tam. The be'en is something real. So then you'd have to be worried about the be'en of meat that was on the kara that now went into the fish. Now you're eating the fish together with the kutach. It's a tam rishon. It's not a tam sheni. Why is it a tam rishon? Because maybe it was a dirty plate. And if it was a dirty plate, that little bit of meat that was on the plate went right into the fish from the fish. It went into the kutach. So that's not a tam sheni, that's already a tam rishon. The teretz is you don't have to worry about it. Zok Rashi, you know when you don't have to worry about it? That's only with a plate. By a knife, you do have to worry about it. Rashi says that it's a little more challenging to clean the knife than it is to clean the plate. Sometimes you just don't recognize it. Therefore, so it comes out it's not a nois and tam bar nois and tam that's nois. It's a regular nois and tam. There's mamash, because on the knife, meaning it has two dinim from a Yeridea perspective. It has in it blias, but it also has on it shanunis. It has a little bit of grease, a little bit of fat. Could be there's a little something on it. And as a result, it could be there's a tam rishon. That's something you're not worried about when you're dealing with a kara. That's something that you are worried about when you're dealing with a sakin. V'oid says Rashi, another teretz. He says, Mishum churfei, bolet tvei, midogam haroischem. That it could be, there's another svara, and that svara is because agav duchka de sakina, polet sakina, ubolet soinin. It could be there's a svara that a knife, when you use a knife, you have to press. There's a certain amount of force that you use when you use a knife that you don't when you're using other utensils. And as a result, it's the duchka de sakina. It's the pressing of the sakin that will maybe allow the tam to go into the tznoin in a way that ordinarily maybe wouldn't be an issue. So it's true, ordinarily, nois and tam is going to be mutter. But the concept of duchke de sakina, that changes anything. But it's a combination, says the Gemara. V'hani mili tznoin, the agav chorfei bala. So because the tznoin is charif, and you have the duchke de sakina, it could be over there, you're not going to have not barnat. So it's not a stira. It's true. Abaya paskin like Shmuel, the dogam shalu bekara, mutter la oichlam bekutach. Why? Because tam sheni is not a problem. Because the tam sheni is in nois and tam bar nois and tam, and it's so diluted the time you don't worry worry about it. But at the same time, you have to read the fine print. And that's essentially the second thing that Abaye was saying. He says there's exceptions to the rule. Number one, Rav and Shmuel were discussing a ka'ara. It's not necessarily true for a sakin, because a sakin has two things. Number one, by sakin you have to be worried about the tam rishon, the shanunis that's on the sakin, and number two, duchka the sakina, together with the davar charif. So over there you have to be worried that maybe even the tam rishon is going to go out in a more gezunta way, so that by the time it's a tam sheni, we don't look at it as a nat barnat, and the chahai gavna, it's going to be aser. So again, this concludes the sugya of nat barnat. Daf yomi, it's about 15 minutes. Yeshiva, it's about a month. But so your day is simin tzadik hey. But just to have a toyameha, a tam of the sugya of, or at least a nat barnat of the sugya of nat barnat. So really, it's a machlokes rishonim. A very important machlokes rishonim. What exactly just the textbook definition of nat barnat is. So the way we explained it is Tosfos Shita. Tosfos Masechtas Vachim, Daf Tzadik Vav Amud Beis says that even though tam ke'ikr, the chiddush of Shmuel of nat barnat is that's only a tam rishon. A tam sheni is nothing. So Rabbi Yochanan said tam oivolei mamasha is aser veiloikin of Rabbeinu tam shita is even aser midayraisa, and it's learned out maybe from Mishras Hanovim and from Geulei Midyan. Right? There's so many sugyas that talk about tam ke'ikr, but says Shmuel, that's only if it's a tam rishon. Once the tam already traveled a second time, at that point it's so kolish that you don't have the halach of tam ke'ikr. That would seem to be the pashup shot. And as I state mefurish and Tosfos Zvachim Daf Tzadik Vav Amud Aleph. This is a kachim Tosfos stating that the Ran and the Sugi right here brings from the Ramban a different shot. The Ran brings from the Ramban that the Ramban said that a tam sheni really is a tam. A tam sheni has chashivas. There's no lack of chashivas in the tam sheni. Stating that, what's the issue? The issue is, dogim sha'olu b'kara, you want to go ahead now and eat the fish together with kutach. What's the problem? It has in it a bli basar. Okay, what's the issue? A basar v'chalav. Because you have fish that has a little bit of a tam basar inside of it. You want to eat it together with chalav, so you're going to be over basar v'chalav. But we know that derech bishul asra Torah, that the isser basar v'chalav is only if you cook the basar and the chalav together. If you eat it together, it's not awesome. Now, it's awesome with the rabbanon, of course. We even wait 6 hours. But that's all on the rabbanon level. As it relates to the iraisa, they would have to be cooked together. Says the Ramban, what would be now if you cook this fish together with the kutach? At this point, it wouldn't be a tam sheni anymore. At this point, it would already be a tam shlishi. Because the basar, just very simple, it went from the basar, the shtik flesh, into the ka'ara, tam rishon, from the ka'ara into the fish, that's tam sheni. And now, on a basar v'chalav deiraisa level, you would have to cook it again. Otherwise, it's not going to be basar v'chalav deiraisa. Derech bishul asr Torah. It's the first sif cotton in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Pei Zayin and Yeridei Hilchos basar v'chalav. This is basics. So you'd have to cook it together with the chalav. If you cooked it together with the chalav, by the time the basar and the chalav merge, now it's already a tam shlishi. Says the Ramban, a tam sheni is a tam. It's a tam shlishi that's not a tam. And because it's the tam shlishi that's not a tam, it's for that reason that there's no way to have basar v'chalav deiraisa. Are you going to tell me? So forget about basar v'chalav deiraisa. Why am I allowed to eat it with kutach? It's basar v'chalav derabbanan. Says the Ramban, a geshmak chiddush, that the only time you have basar v'chalav derabbanan is if it would be possible for this basar v'chalav to come to a basar v'chalav deiraisa. So if you're going to eat meat and you're going to eat cheese separately, being that if you cook them together, it would be basar v'chalav deiraisa. So if you eat it even not cooked together, at the very least, it's basar v'chalav derabbanan. But being that this is never possible to come to basar v'chalav deiraisa, because if you would cook it, it would be already a tam shlishi, and that's not the way the Ramban understands it. So at that point, says the Ramban, that's why you're not going to have this. But the Ramban asks another kash on his pshat. He says, why aren't you worried about a tipas chalav falling into the fish? If a tipas chalav would fall into the fish right now, hot fish, a tipas chalav falls in, you don't have shishim to be mavatul. It would be basar v'chalav deiraisa. So all the Moshe Kalim speak out in the beginning of Pei Zayin that even though derech bishul asar Torah, bishul's lav dafka, it doesn't have to be bishul. The point is that let's say chalav would fall in. So forget about, or just put differently, forget about the basar that's in the dag going into the chalav. What about the chalav going into the dag? If a tam sheni is not a tam, the way Tosfos understands in his Vach and Tzadik Vav, okay, so then you're never going to have a basar v'chalav. You have nothing to worry about. You don't have basar. What do you mean? I don't have basar. I have a bli of basar in the dag. Yeah, but it's a nois and tam bar nois and tam. It's not going to be a problem. But the Ramban said a chiddush. The Ramban said that really a tam sheni is a tam. It's a tam shlishi that's not a tam. What's the issue? The issue is how you can have basa v'chalav d'oraisa by cooking them together. Once you cook them together, you're dealing with a tam shlishi. That's as it relates to the basa that went into the chalav. What about the chalav that went into the basa? The chalav that goes into the basa. So the basar is a tam sheni. The chalav went into the basar. You have chalav in the tam sheni of basar. It should be a problem. Says the Ramban, another geshmak chiddush. That you see from here that the only time you have basar v'chalav deiraisa is like chaylo iser basar v'chalav elam ken shneim noisin tam zeh bezeh. V'chol she'echad mehem eino yachal lahatem es chaveroi eino nasa basar v'chalav av shechaver yachal lahatem oisai. That the only time you have basar v'chalav, each one is able to make the other one problematic. But if it only works one way and not the other, so the chalav can make the basar a problem, but the basar can't make the chalav a problem. On that, you do not have the halacha of basar v'chalav deiraisa. Incidentally, Rabbi Bienenfeld told me last night that when he learned the sugyas of taruvas, that they had a shaila in Beis Medrash in Koilel, if you stick a fork, let's say you have a fleshik fork and you stick it into a pickle jar to pull a pickle out, am I allowed to eat that pickle now together with milchiks? So you're going to tell me it's a nat bar nat. But the shaila was that maybe the duchka of the mazlik is like a duchka de sakina. I mean, Chazal said duchka de sakina. So what would be the halacha if you took the fork and you stuck it into a pickle? Right, there's charifus in the pickle. So what would be now? Would you have the halacha of duchka de sakina? So he said there was a big tumult. Nobody really knew. So he decided to ask Hagoy Ramosha Feinstein. So he said he went on the train. He went to Ramosha, and he asked Ramosha the shaila, what's the halacha by a fork? Ramosha said it's mutter. So he said, what do you mean? But you have the duchka. He says, no, because by a knife, he says, Chazal were very, very precise when they said what they said. Number one, you have the act of cutting, and you have the force of it pressing. He said, maybe you have the force of pressing as it relates to the mazlik, but cutting you're not going to have. But halacha l'maisa, psak, from the Gadol Adar, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who said that duchka de sakina is dafka de sakina, but not with the mazlik. Either way, Zok the Gemara vayte boy, menei Rav Dimi, Rav Nachman, anu halacha. Maula nuche kado de milcha gabe kado de kimcha. Is it okay to have your kad of salt, your bucket of salt, your salt shaker, so to speak, next to kimcha, which is kutach, next to a milichiga meichel? What's the reason not to? The concern is that maybe a little bit of kutach will end up in the salt, and then you're going to use the salt together with your meat, and as a result, you're going to end up with basar v'chalav. Amalei, so he told him, aser, the chalamai. What about vinegar? Could you have an open container of vinegar next to your kutach? Amalei, shari, that's mutter. So he said, what's the difference? What's the difference if it's salt or if it's vinegar? Each time, manavshach. Is there a chashash you're going to use it later with basar, or is there no chashash? So Rav Nachman told him, so he told him, when you measure for me a large amount of salt, meaning do me a big favor and then I'll tell you. It was just an expression that Rav Nachman used to use. My time was, okay, tachlis, the maisa, I hear. But the maisa, what's the reason? He told him, that in the event that the kutach would fall into the salt would not have the ability to be mevatel the kutach. So there's a real concern that you may take the salt and now use it with your flesheks, and you're going to end up with a taruvos. However, if kutach fell into vinegar, the metzius is that the vinegar would be mevatel the kutach. As a result, you're not going to end up with a kutach of visser. So for that reason, it wouldn't be an issue. Incidentally, this Gemara right here is the basis to the halacha that the Ramah brings in the end of Siman Tzadik Hey, to have a separate salt shaker for milichiks and fleshiks. But I heard this from Zev Smith. He said that, just to be clear, again, I don't remember the pratim, but basically what he said is that you have to appreciate that times have changed. And once upon a time, they didn't have salt shakers. So they would have like a little plate or a little kad, a little ka'ara where they would put the salt on, and you would take your hands, your greasy hands, your hands that may have melech sedoimus on it, that are your dayim mezuamos, where for sure everybody holds my machreinim are asim, is a dinday rice and it's a chayv and it's a mitzvah, and you may stick it in. So there's no question that there may be grease of basar, but now it's a little bit different, and being that we have salt shakers, a little bit less of a chash. Now there are other issues that you have to take into consideration when it comes to salt shakers, and that is the steam. Exactly. So we're not learning the sugyas of Zayah now, but Zayah is something real, and as a result, if you're going to, for example, you're going to spice your Chulin before Shabbos, and it's hot, it's Kameichel Ben Drusai, it has to be la'alocha, and the steam pumping out, and you're going to put the salt shaker on, that steam, that Zayah is real. That's real. That's no worse than tam. And as a result, if that's going to enter, it's going to penetrate through the little holes in your salt shaker, so now you're going to have real shamnunis of basar inside your salt shakers, how you allowed to go ahead and use that now for milchik? So again, ask your local rabbi, but as it relates to the basic halach and Shulchan Aruch of, as it relates to the basic halach of Shulchan Aruch of salt shakers, again, this is for Zev Smith, the salt shakers of yesteryear are not the same as the ones of today. Either way, Zok the Gemara Vayta, Bar Goizla, there was a pigeon. This was already a geschachtene pigeon. It was just fleischiks. The nafel the kada the kamka. Right, because all this even went on the mizbech. So a kada the kamka, it fell into a. No, it's not the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer's cases, it was even menachai. It was alive. Right, the first shiloh that was sent to the hafla when he became the rav in Frankfurt. But either way, so the nafel the kada the kamka. Shaya rav chinen abrei the rav mi pashrunyo. So it ended up in Kutach. So somehow your chicken ended up in Kutach. Happens a machzach. So they went to Rav Chinen abrei the rav mi pashrunyo, and they asked him the shiloh, could you eat the chicken? You think for sure not. And he said, yeah, it's mutter. Yeah, why not? No, why not? It was, it was swimming in Kutach. Oh, my Rava, but Rava commented and he said, Man chacham lemishri ki hai gavna. Why? You see what a chacham Rab Chinin Abrei the Rav mi pashrunyu was, that he knew to be mad to this. Why? Rab Chinin Abrei the Rav. No one else would have known to be mad to this. Why not? What would have been the issue? I mean, at first glance, take the bar goizla out, and you take it out, you wash it off, it should be fine. The reason this was going to be an issue is because the kutach is salty. That's the nature of, so we're learning, we have a lot of clues about kutach. Maybe we could piece this together, come up with a recipe. But for now, we just have clues. So either way, so the kutach, right, the kutach was very, very salty. And being that it was very salty, so you have Shmuel's halacha of moliach hareu karesech. So if it was in this salty dairy meichel, even though it wasn't hot and it wasn't on a fire, that's not what the mitzvah was. So you think at first glance, it's soina b'tsoina, just wash it off. No, but there's a salt issue. Don't you have that halacha? So says the Rava, the Reb Chinin Abrei the Rav Pashrunya was a tremendous chacham, and he knew something that a lot of people don't know, and that is kasava. He held that's only if it's so salty that the average person can't eat it. As it relates to kuta, it's not that salty. I mean, people eat it. Obviously, you serve it as a dish. So as a result, that's not what Shmuel said. But again, you have to read the fine print with so many of these halachas. V'hani says the Gemara, Chai, this is only if it was not cooked yet, the goizla. Abel tzli, if it's roasted, then you can't do that. But you klipa, at the very least, you have to take off a kidei klipa, the peels, shear. V'ispe pili, if this cracks in it, sounds like whether it's raw or not, kulei asa, then it's all going to be asa. V'metavel b'tavlin, and if it was already spiced, kulei asa, it's all going to be asa, right? Because once you spice it, it softens it up, like we saw yesterday in the sugi of liver. Either way, zok the Gemara vayter, another halacha. So we're going le'inyan, all shaloi ba'is inyan, but really ba'is inyan, these are sugis of basar v'chalav and tarufas. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, kika shechatach oleo basar. If somebody cut meat on top of basar, so this meat was roasted, but it wasn't kashered yet. It wasn't salted yet. So we know that before you eat meat, as we spoke about yesterday, you have to kasher the meat. Kashering the meat involves so many things. It involves removing the chalavin. It involves removing the gid hanasha. It also involves removing the dam. How do we remove the dam? What's the practical halacha as it relates to that? We do melicha. We salt it. So yeah, the melicha is a complicated process. How long do you have to salt it? How much salt? It has to be done in close proximity to the shechita. It's a whole sugya arucha in Shas and in Shulchan Aruch of exactly how melicha is done. But this next Gemara that we're going to learn is based really on a hanacha that there's another way to kasher meat, and that is by roasting it. So if you roast the meat, the process of roasting extracts the blood, and as a result, it could be that in and of itself would constitute kashering. And as we'll see, it's a machlekes amayiron whether that works or it doesn't work. Shmuel was clearly of the opinion that just because you roast meat doesn't make it kosher. You still have to salt it, you still have to kasher it. So Rav Nachman and Shmuel, based on that, Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, if somebody would cut roasted meat on top of a kikar, on top of a loaf of bread, also likely you wouldn't be able to eat the bread. And the reason is because you're still concerned about dam that may be absorbed in the meat. Didn't you roast it? Yeah, but the roasting didn't extract all the blood. Now the blood went into the bread. As a result, you can't eat the bread. Zok to Gemara, but again, Fahani mili da aspik. Number one, that's only a problem if the meat is very red. Rabbeinu Gershom says that it's talking about that while the animal was alive, there was like one part of the animal that was very red. And it was a result of the fact that it was bruised while it was alive. So that means there was just a lot of blood there. And as a result, we're worried that extra blood didn't come out in the sleep process, and that's the blood you're worried about as it relates to the kikar. It's only an issue if the kikar, this bread, is very red. Obviously, it looks like there's blood there, and it went through the entire kikar. So you see it on both sides of the kikar. That's how much blood there was. And only if this redness that you see is very thick. Aval klishta, if it's not so thick, less lamba, then it's probably not blood. So again, there has to be a lot of raglayim l'dover that this is blood. If you have all this raglayim l'dover, then it's an issue. Otherwise, it's not going to be an issue. It says the Gemara, Shmuel shadei le'lekalbe, Shmuel l'shitasai. Right? Rav Nachman said this halach in the name of Shmuel. So Shmuel, if he ever had this situation, he would throw it to his dog. Now, incidentally, we have the girsa shadei le'lekalbe. Sounds like Shmuel had a dog. Others have the girsa shadei le'lekelev. He would send it to a dog. Either way, Rav Huna Yov le'leshamai. Rav Huna used to give it to his gabra. Fake the Gemara. What's going on? If Rav Huna held that it's mutter to eat this kikar, the kuli al mishari, then he could have eaten it. He could have given it to anybody or eaten it himself. And he also, if he held it was also the kuli al aser, that it should have been aser to anybody. So Rav Huna really held it's mutter. He's not worried about this dam. Rav Huna holds that once you roast it, there's nothing to worry about anymore. Where Rav Huna was worried about was just personally. He was a little bit of an istinus, Rashi says, and that's why he wasn't comfortable eating this. Rava achale, Rava would eat it. The karile, you know what he referred to it as? Chamar basar, the wine of the meat. So sometimes you have a real rare piece of meat. You see looks like blood. Right, that's what we're talking about. That's precisely what this sugi is about. He would refer to it as the wine. Again, Rava, somehow, there's so many references with Rava and wine throughout Shas. Rav Nachman Shmuel, another halacha. This is me'inyan le'inyan. Ein manichin kli tachas basar, ad sheyichla kol mara ad mumis shabai. So, we spoke in yesterday's daf a little bit about the beiduge. What was the beiduge? So this was a kli, a pan that they would put on the bottom of the tanner, and as the fat would ooze off the meat that was on the spit, suspended inside the tanner, they would collect that fat and they would take the top of it off and, make grieving with it. But whatever, either way. So said Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel that you're not allowed to put a kli tachas basar actually yichla kol marad dat mubishabai. That if the meat that you're roasting is still red, it still looks like there's blood, then you can't eat this shuman, because then we think that there's dam there. Says the Gemara, okay, so how do you know if it is red, it's not red? I mean, meat, even after it's kosher, it's going to look red. Real meat looks red. It's like, how are you supposed to know if this is the marav dam, it's not the marav dam? So the Gemara, that once the meat starts smoking, when the smoke coming from the meat, at that point, already all the dam is gone. How do you know? I mean, the meat, they have a big piece of meat, so it's smoking. Maybe part of the meat, the part that's closer, the mata part, the part that's closer to the coals, maybe that's the part that's smoking, but the part on top is not smoking, it's still dripping in. So how do you know? Rav Ashi said, less late takanta. You're right, there really is no way. Ella, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to put 2 grains of salt on the bottom of the pit. What happens is you put it in the beiduge, the dam is going to suck into the salt, right? That's the purpose of the salt. When you salt down, what's the idea? The idea is to extract the blood. So the blood is going to attract to the salt, and as a result, you don't have to worry about it. Umeshafia, Rashi says, Meshafia means hashoifa yayin lechaveiroi, benachas. Very gently, you remove the fat from on top. You don't have to worry about the dam that's a sarif, because you're allowed to assume that the dam ended up in the salt that's on the bottom of this pot. So again, we had 2 halachas of Shmuel with regards to the dam of basar after it was already roasted. The first halacha was that Shmuel said, that you're never allowed to cut roasted meat on top of bread. And the reason is because even though you roasted it, it doesn't matter. You're still concerned that there may be a little bit of dam, and the dam may end up in the bread. So as a result, you're never... Now, Shmuel said you don't always have to be concerned. It's only a problem if it's asthmic, if it had a wound, and if it went all the way through, and if it's thick, its consistency is the consistency of blood. It doesn't matter. But the point is, it's awesome, because there is a chashash, there is... sometimes at least, a chashash, that if you take roasted meat and you cut it on top of basar, if it wasn't properly kashered, that it could be there's going to be an issue. Okay. Now Shmuel said another halacha about roasting meat. And that is that if you're roasting meat on top of, again, it's not kasher meat. If you're roasting meat on top of the beiduge, so then you have to be worried that a little bit of the dam of the roasted meat is going to end up in the beiduge. Thus, you can't just use that fat because it could be there's going to be an issue. But here he qualified the halacha. He said it's not always an issue. It's only an issue if it's not smoking yet. But once it's smoking, then at that point it's not going to be a problem. And the Gemara holds that these two halachas are aside to each other. Because the first halacha seems to be more machmer. The first halacha seems to be that it's always a problem to cut meat on top of a kikar. There always could be a concern. From the second halach, it sounds like there's an expiration for this concern. Once it starts smoking, now it's hard to know when it stops smoking, but the point is that once it stops smoking, at the very least, it is going to be okay. So, with regards to the second halacha that he said in the name of Shmuel, is it possible that Shmuel said, that once it's for sure not red anymore, at that point it's going to be okay? But didn't Shmuel say in the first halacha, Rashi, it was already roasted. So the two halachas seem to be sides to each other. The first halacha seems to be much more machmer, much more inclusive, that any roasted meat you have this concern. The second halacha, it sounds like it's only when it's still red, when it didn't start smoking yet. Says the Gemara, Shani Hassam, what's the chilik? So we're coming full circle. The agav duchka de sakina palit. Over there, there's also a duchka de sakina. You're cutting the meat. So there is a concern of the dam that maybe will come out. As opposed to when you're not cutting it, you're just roasting it, there's no concern. Now you're going to tell me, if you worry that the duchka de sakina is going to extract blood, that means the blood is there. So if the blood is there, then the meat is not kosher. What's the teretz? Dama muvla beivarim is kosher. The only time dam is a problem, dam that comes out. If the only way that this dam can come out is with the knife, then it's not going to be an issue. It's only an issue once it comes out. The duchka de sakina will cause it to come out, enter the kikar, thus the kikar is not kosher. But as it relates to just roasting it, there's no duchka de sakina. So duchka de sakina could be more than even roasting. You see how chamor duchka de sakina is. One more Gemara, just a few lines, as this is going to really segue into tomorrow's stuff. If somebody salted dogim and oifos together, so the halach is asurim, they're going to be asur. Why? We're talking about oifos that weren't kashered yet. So you're kashering, let's say, the oif together with fish. You're salting it together. The halacha is you now can't eat the fish. You can't eat the fish because the dam that left the oif is going to now penetrate the fish. So that's the Gemara. If we're talking about a keli that doesn't have holes in it, then even oifis and oifis should be asur. The halacha is that when you do malicha, you have to use a kli menukah. You have to use a keli that has holes, so that the dam and that's now in the salt is going to ooze out of the keli through those holes. If you use a kli she'eina menukah, you can't do malika, period. Not oifis, but oifis. You can't even use oifis by yourself. So it says the Gemara, what exactly was Rav Nachman's case? What's the context? Are we talking about a klisha in a menukiv? I feel oifis v'oifis nami asiri. And for the same price, you can't even use oifis, even just to salt one oif is a problem, because you're reabsorbing everything. The iba kli menukiv, and if it's a kli menukiv, I feel dogim oifis nami shari, then it should be mutter. I mean, if you can salt oifis, I mean, what's unique about oifis and dogim? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you what's we're talking about a kli menukiv. The dogim, fish are unique. Mishun the rafi karmayu, being that it's very soft, kadmi opalti. It's maflit. It does its platus first, right? Food is maflit, and it emits, and it's also beleya. It also absorbs. But we also saw this concept of ID the tarid lahaflit and beleya. That's something that's so busy being you can't be maflit and beleya at the same time. So liver, for example, that has so much time to be maflit, we said is never beleya. You're even allowed to cook kosher liver with non-kosher meat. What do you mean? It's beleya from the non-kosher meat? It's not, because it's so tarid being maflit, it doesn't have the ability to be beleya. So it says the Gemara, I'll just play out how it works when you have oif and fish together. Fish is very soft. As a result, it's maflit very quickly. Oif is kamiti. Oifis, however, is a little harder. So being that it's a little tougher, it's not maflit right away. Once the fish stops being maflit, plate the oifis will still be maflit, but the balimine, and then the fish is going to be beleya from the oif. The point is, oifis and oifis is not an issue in this case. It's the oifis and the dogim that's an issue, just simply because of the timelines. The oifis, it takes much longer for it to do his thing than it does the dogim. Thus, after the dogim are finished being ordinarily, they're both being maflit. But being that the oifis and the dogim don't work exactly at the same pace, so the dag will finish being maflit while the oif is still being maflit, the dag will then have the ability to be boileya, the salt that has the dam inside of it, or the dam. And for that reason, Rav Nachman said a unique halacha, dafke dogim va'oifos, shemolchin zem zeh asurim. So again, every Gemara that we just learned now really requires a proper limud. It's beyond the scope of what we do. So just one light ha'ara as it relates to today's stuff. And that is the first sugya was the halacha of not barnat. Now there's nothing light in not barnat stating that. The raid. And that is, said the Gemara initially, that the halacha of not barnat is machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Dogim she'alu b'kar, Rav amar asur la'oichlam b'kutach, v'Shmuel amar muter la'oichlam b'kutach. Rav amar asur noisen tamu, v'Shmuel amar muter noisen tam bar noisen tamu. Says the Gemara, v'had Rav, lav b'ferish itmar, ela michlolo itmar. That even though B'Shem Rav, throughout Shas, Noisen Tam bar Noisen Tam is Aser, not halacha, but Noisen Tam bar Noisen Tam is Aser, but Rav really never said it beforish. And this Messiah that we have, it all came from a Maisa Shahaya, Kachaya, that involved Rav. What was the story? Rav was once by his grandson, Rav Shimi Bar Chia's house, and Chosh Bein of his eyes were hurting. So he made him some medication, Abdullah Shaifa B'tzah, and he served it to him, and he put it on a plate. Later, he served food on the plate, and Rav commented, he said, Yov, taima kulei hai. He said, wow. He said, this shaifa was able to give tam. Now, they assumed that Rav was probably coming to say some sort of halacha. What was the halacha that he was coming to say? He was coming to say that even though by the time the tam of the shaifa was in the food that Rav was eating, it was already a nois and tam by nois and tam, he was probably trying to say that nois and tam by nois and tam is a tam, and the halachas of tam tikkur apply to it. Thus, you see from here that Rav holds that not barnad is asa. The Maritzchias in a tshuva, in Shiloh's tshuva's Maritzchias, it's a tshuva that was written to his son, Rab Chaim Chayos. It's in Siman Ayin Aleph. Brings from this Gemara a mekar nifla to a very sussum lie in the Rambam, something that the Kesef Mishnah and others grappled with for generations, trying to understand what exactly the Rambam meant, where he got this from. Said the Maratz Chayos, tucked away in this Gemara, I have a makar to a very shver Rambam. What's this Rambam? We've mentioned this many times together in the daf. It's an Hilchas Deis from all places. It's Perek Beis Halacha Dal. The Rambam's talking about the Maila of Shtika. La'olam yarba adam shtika. A person should try not to talk too much. V'lo yedaber, and he shouldn't speak. Ela oy b'dvar chachma, oy b'dvarim shetzorich lehem lechaye gufay. Says the Rambam, Amra Rav Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh. It is said about Rav, who was a Talmud of Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, shelo yisach sicha b'teila kol yamav, that he never spoke an extra word. He never said a sicha b'teila. V'zui sichas reiva kol adam, which incidentally is what most people do all day. Rav never spoke a sicha b'teila kol yama. Zayzach the Rama. Says the Kesef Mishnah, the Perek HaYashon, in Masechta Sukkah, Dav Chof Ches Amud Aleph, Matzasi Kena Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. I found this about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Avul al Rav eni yodeya ke'es mekayimai. I don't know where he found this from. Where did he get this about Rav? I found it about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, if you take a look at that Gemara in Perek HaYashon, Sukkah Chof Ches Amud Aleph, you'll see it about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and about Rabbi Eliezer. Right? The Gemara says it about Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Eliezer was a Talmud Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but the point is you find it about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and maybe Rabbi Eliezer as well. But as it relates to Rav, Ein Yedea Ke'es Mekayim. So, Fregt Kesef Mishnah, he says he doesn't understand where exactly the Rambam got this halacha. Rab Chaim Chayes, Rab Tzvi Chayes' son, sent his father Shaila, and in the Shaila he discussed a lot of interesting halachas. It's a very long tshuva, there's a lot of geschmacka things there. But the first thing that he discussed was this right here, and he was trying to find maybe a makar to the Rambam who said that Amra Rav Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh shelo yisach sicha b'teila kol yamav. Says the Maratz Chiyos that the truth is that if you take a look in the Seder HaDoros brings a baraisa. He brings a brisa that discusses 10 chumras that Rav was noig. And Ka'es Matzasi, I found a mitzvah that the Chidah in the Sefer Pesach Einayim, I recently bought the Sefer Pesach Einayim, and there's so much there. But either way, the Chidah wrote 2 svarim on Shas. He wrote so many svarim, Pesach Einayim and Maris Ha'ayim. There's a lot on the Divrei Agada, so not that many svarim you can tap into when it comes to Divrei Agada. On Halach and Lamdus, there's no shortage of svarim. But when it comes to Divrei Agada, so you have, of course, the Marsha, you have the Maral. We always speak out from the Ein Eliyahu, who's a Talmud Reb Chaim Volozhin. But you have the Teres Chaim has a lot on Agada but the Chidah, Pesach Einayim and Maris Ha'ayim, so there's a lot of nice things on Agada. So this is in the very, very end of Masechtas Menachos. And he brings this brisa, and he says, Umotzasi b'sefer apardis l'Rashi. That Rashi brought this already. But the Rishonim clearly had this brisa which discusses 10 chumras that Rav was noyeg. And the chumras are like having maski dalad amas became a skufa, and he never looked outside of his dalad amas. He ate shalish sudos. He used to wear tefillin the whole day. He never ate from a sudas rishus. He had a very nice voice. He used to always daven for the Amid Rabbit. Fascinating chumras. So he goes through the chumras over there. But you know what's not mentioned? What's not mentioned is that he didn't speak a sicha b'teila. And if that's the case, we're being Moisef Tmiya ala Tmiya. Loy mi baya, the Kesef Mishnah's Kasha. The Kesef Mishnah's Kasha, Eini Yodea Ke'es Mekayim. I just don't know where the Rambam got this from. The Rambam never spoke of Zich B'Teila. But here you have a brisa that lists Rav's top 10 chumras, and somehow this didn't make the list. Which, if you think about it, is mamish tamur. Says the Maritz Chayas, I think I have a makar. You know what the makar is? A Gemara Masechtas Chulin, Daf Kuf Yod Aleph on the base. A Gemara that everybody knows. A Gemara that has so much lumdis and halacha intertwined with it and tucked away in that Gemara is a makar. Because the Gemara says that Rav holds not barnad is aser. And Zok the Gemara hadalav la beferish itmar elo michale itmar. Because once upon a time Rav was by his grandson, his eyes were hurting, he made him a medication, then later he served food for him in that same plate, and Rav said the following thing. He said, Yoiv, taima kule hai. And from that we buy a chiddush nifla, shalei ali b'dehilchasa, and that is that not barnad is aser. How's it possible, says Marzchais, that a halacha of nice and tam bar nice and tam came from, well, what did Rav say? He didn't say anything. He said something that we say all day. Whatever, he just at gezok. The teretz is Amra Rav Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh Shelo Soch Sicha B'Teila Kol Yamav. Rav never spoke a Sicha B'Teila. There was no such thing as Rav just saying it. And if Rav said Yov Taima, it must be that he was coming to say a halacha. What halacha could he have been possibly saying? Oh, that's easy. It was nice and time by nice and time. There's not a lot of options. So said Maritz Chayes, this Gemara he believes is where the Rambam got it from. Because if there was such a thing by Rav that he would have spoken a Sicha B'Teila, there would be no way in the world to extract this halacha from what Rav said. Elamai, Amra Rav, Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh Lo Yisach Sicha B'Teila Kol Yamav. No such thing as a Sicha B'Teila. If there's no such thing as a Sicha B'Teila, so there you go. That's going to be the makar. Incidentally, and we've spoken this out many times, even though there is no mefurish makar, apparently, ka'es. There's no mefurish makar. As it relates to this Rambam Shita, but if you look around and you open your eyes to it, you'll see there's so many Gemaras where Rav makes comments in Shas about the Mailas Hashtika. Reb Chaim Chayos, Reb Tzvi Chayos, his son himself, shtel zu a Gemara Masechtas Chagiga, Daf Hey Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Magid la'adam masichai. That after 120, they're going to tell a person sichai. What does that mean? Amar Rav, afilu sicha yesera, an extra word. Shebein ish le'ishtoi. That's b'shas Tashmish. Magidim loy la'adam b'shas misa. They're going to tell him about b'shas misa. Even then, a sicha yisera is something that's going to be judged very carefully. The Gemara says in Masechtas Sukkah, Daf Chof Aleph on the base. This is a well-known memra. I mean, nayin shafilu sichas talmidei chacham and tzricha limud. How do you know that the sichas chulim of a talmid chacham requires limud? Shenemar, the pasuk says, va'oleu lo yiba. Who said it? So the Gemara, everybody knows. But who said it? That's really complicated. But who did it trace itself back to? Amarav. This is Rav. And that's exactly what happened over in Chulin, Kuf Yad Aleph on Beis. This is no Dairish. Rav was the Dairish of Mekayim, and we were Mekayim, what Rav did. Meaning, Rav said, Sichas Chulin shal Tamid Chacham and Tzrichas Talmud, and that's mamish the sugi of not barnat. This is Sichas Chulin shal Tamid Chacham and Tzrichas Talmud. The Gemara says in Masechtas Psachim, Daf Gimel Amid Beis, La'olam Yishana Adam L'Talmidei Derech Kitzara. That when you teach, you're supposed to teach B'derech Kitzara. Okay, a well-known Maimer Chazal. Who said it? Amrav hu namar Rav. This is also Rav. So you have Rav Chagig Daf Hey Amud Beis, Magid Olam Asichai. You have Rav Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, Afilu Sichas Chulin shal Tamid Chacham and Tzrichas Talmud. You have Rav Psachim Daf Gimel Amid Beis that says Lo Olam Yishana Adam L'Talmidei. Even when you're giving shir, you should speak B'derech Kitzara. So again, you have a Rambam who said, Amra Rav Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh Lo Yisach Sicha B'Teila Kol Yamav. So maybe we'll have a mefurish and makar to that. But as it relates to this concept, this idea of Rav with the Mailas Hashtika, that's something that without question you do have. And says Maritz Chayes, it was only because of Rav. If this was someone else, this Gemara would have never happened. It's Rav who was Lo Yisach Sicha B'Teila Kol Yamav. It was Rav that had the Rav La B'Ferish Itma'el Mechol. Incidentally, you have that in other places as well. Had the Rav Labaferi Shitma El Michlal Itma. But the point is, all he said was, Yov Taima Kulei Hai, and from there, Nat Barnat is going to be Asa. On Sunday's daf, we spoke a little bit about Rav as well. The Gemara over there was discussing the halacha of the kal, the udder of an animal, which poses a challenge in the laws of Basa v'Chalav, simply because of the fact it has milk inside. So it's a piece of meat, but there's a little bit of milk, and there's a Mishnah and a Gemara, and there were two Lishaynas, what Reb Zera said in the name of Rav. The first Lishna, Reb Zera said in the name of Rav, that it's mutter l'katchila to roast the kal and to eat it. The second Lishna, Reb Zera said in the name of Rav that it's going to be awesome. And then the Gemara said, Tani Kabasi the Lishna kam. So the question was, where did this second Lishna come from? And Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, the majority of it discussed how we know, where did it come from? If there was a Messiah, Reb Zera heard in the name of Reb Zera was a Talmud of Rav. So if he had heard from his Rebbe Rav that there's such an idea, it must have come from somewhere. Where exactly did it come from? The Gemara had two versions of where it may have come from. One of the versions is that the Gemara says Rabbi Elazar was in Eretz Yisrael, he met Zeiri, and he asked Zeiri, do you know where this Messiah that Rav said Chal was like? He said, go speak to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So he goes to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi and he told him, I'm going to tell you what happened. What happened was Rav was in a city called Tatlafush, and in Tatlafush he overhears a woman talking to her friend, and she says, I'm going to cook a quarter pound meat. Do you know how much milk I'm supposed to put in the pot? What exactly the recipe is? And Rav said, Rebbeinu Shalom, this is like Basa v'Chalav 101. I mean, you're cooking meat together with milk. So Rav stayed there, says the Gemara, and he went ahead and he taught them the laws of Basa v'Chalav. And not only did he teach them the laws of Basa v'Chalav, but he was very machmer Basa v'Chalav, because he felt that being that there was such Amei Haaretz, right? Sometimes it's kedai to be a little bit more from, because you don't have to take the chumras, right? This is counterintuitive. You find this sometimes. That sometimes for the Amei Haaretz, they were more machmer, right? This is counts backwards. But the point is, a Rav felt, because they knew nothing, now we have to. I mean, if you're upgate in a yid, you know Yeridayas, then you can eat the chal. If you don't know it, then you can't eat the chal. But that was the rest of the story. So when Reb Zera heard in the name of Rav that chal is us, it wasn't for the Hamoinah. It was in that community in Tatlafush where they mamish knew nothing. Rav Bika matzah. Rav found a bika. V'gadar bageder, and he built a fence. He built a wall. Why? Because he felt that he had to protect them in the laws of Basa v'Chalav. He said that even kechal is going to be awesome. The truth is that you find this idea of Rav Bika matzah gather in other places as well. You have it in Masechtas Eruvin, the context over there is not Basa v'Chalav, the context over there is Eruvin, and the Gemara over there says that Rav said a chumrah in Eruvin, and the Gemara says, I'll tell you the rest of the story. You know what really happened? What happened was Rav Iklu the Mecharia. Rav came to the city called the Mecharia, and this is what he did, and the reason he did it was because he saw that they were very lax in these halachas. So Bika Matzah, he found the Bika, and he went ahead and he built together. There's another Gemara. There's a Gemara Masechtes Eruvin Daf Kuf Amud Beis. It's a Zera'im context. And the Gemara over there too brings a chumrah that Rav said. Says the Gemara, what the background over there was? Rav came to the city called Apastia. Va'asar bigduda, and the reason he did it was Rav Bika Matzah V'gadaba. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these cities right. Ubada Bageder. But the point is, you have three Gemaras. You have a Gemara Masechtes Chum Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph with Tatlafush, and then you have another Gemara Masechtes Eruvin Daf Vav Amud Aleph D'Mcharia, and then you have another Gemara Masechtes Kuf Apastia. But the point is that in three different sugyas, Rav comes to cities, he sees that they're very lax. Ubada Bageder. So what's going on? What was Rav doing in all these cities? I thought Rav lived in Surah. He lived in Rav lived in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Abavel. I mean, Rav traveled a lot throughout his life. If you just follow the basic timeline, Rav was in Eretz Yisrael, then he came to Bavel, he was with Shmuel, then he left Shmuel. Again, this everybody knows. But there has to be a little bit of the rest of the story. So we mentioned this very, very briefly on Sunday, B'Shem, Rav Shlomo Zalman Braun, the Shar Mitzion Balacha, who quotes Rav Shri Regaim. But I took a look in Rav Shri Regaim's Zigaris. Incidentally, Rav Shri Regaim, of course, was one of the great Goinim, needs no introduction. He was also Rav Hai Gaon's father. But either way, it's Rav Shri Regaim in his famous letter. So when he talks about Rav and Shmuel, so he says, "Ubiyoyme de Rebbe Nachis Rav Labavel." Rav was a Talmud of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. We just read the Rambam. And then he went to Bavel. And initially he went to Nahardah, which is where Shmuel was, which is where the big yeshiva was. That's where everything was happening. So Rav goes and he settles together with Shmuel. And then there was an incident between Rav and Shmuel. Because of that incident, Shafke Rav l'Shmuel ben Nahardah. So Rav left Nahardah, he left Shmuel. Dahava duchte. And it was a Makam Torah. The Israchik l'duchta to have a Beit Torah. And he went to a new city, a city where there was no Torah. V'hu Surah. the city that he went to was Surah. V'hi Masa Mechasya, which is Masa Mechasya. This we spoke at on Sunday. V'avi Yisrael nefishi hasam. And there were a lot of Yidden there, but v'afilu iser v'heter loy haviyodi. But they didn't even know the halachas of Basa v'chalav. V'amar Rav, do you know what Rav said? And this is the punchline. Lanias daite. He said, Esuv hacha, I'm going to settle here. Ki heichi de lahava Torah b'haiduchta. I'm going to make sure there's Torah here. There's people that they mamish don't know the laws of Basa v'chalav. You can't just let them go. They're dying spiritually. Someone has to do something. So you know what Rav did? Rav settled there, and Rav taught them Torah. Said Rav Shira Goyin, Kahu Ma'isa de Mefarish Per Kol Abasa. Rav Bikam Matzav V'God B'Geder. Ki Ichto Litatlofush. Agmarina and Vairina and Isser Kali Ve'Oikerech Sidra. And then eventually, Surah became a thriving city, and that's the Gemara getting Davav and Aleph with regards to B'fanei Nechta, Shchichim Esifta, and again. But says Rav Shira Goyin that there was an incident. Rav had to leave Shmuel, and now Vayaris Kol Kikar Ayarde. Where am I going to settle? Where's Rav going to pitch his tent? Rav went to Surah. You know why? There was no Torah there. So he said, I'm going to go to a place where there's no... Mamish set up a Kiruv community. And he went ahead and he said, since there's kein Torah, I'm going to go... This is Rav. This is Rav. This is the Lamdan Adar. This is the Gadol Adar. Rav is Tanu Polig. And Rav, where did he settle? He didn't settle. He built a city, but that's not where he settled. He went ahead and he taught Torah. And Shri Regai brought one example, Tatlafish, but there's other examples. Rav is doing Kiruv in Tatlafish. Rav is doing Kiruv in the Mcharia. He's doing Kiruv in cities that we can't pronounce. Right? That's where Rav is. This is unbelievable. That this is something that Rav was Ayman in. It's amazing. I was thinking maybe that's why Rav was Zoicha to be called Rav. Why was Rav called Rav? Rav's real name was Abba. Rav's real name was Abba. So in today's daf we saw that Avud the Shmuel's real name was Abba Bar Abba. But Rav's name was Abba Aricha. So why exactly was Rav called Rav? There's a Rashbam in Mesechtes Bava Basra daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph. The Rashbam says, he's talking about Rav, and he says that his name was Abba. V'ayit korelei Rav, k'moshe koren l'Rabbi Yehuda Anasi Rebbe Be'eretz Yisrael, korelei nami b'Bavel Rav. Came Asasi b'Sefer Aruch Hamuva Miroima. That's what he found the Sefer Aruch. That just like Yehuda Anasi was called Rebbe, says the Rashbam in Bava Basra, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, that's why Rav was called Rav. Rav was Zoicha to be called. Now we know why Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was Zoicha to be called Rebbe. That's the Mishnah. The whole Torah Shema Peh comes from Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. But why was Rav Zoicha? Because he was the God Adar, and Shmuel was just Shmuel. Rav was called Rav. Rabbi Yochanan, why wasn't Rabbi Yochanan called Rav? Why was Rav Zoicha to be called Rav? I had a hergish that maybe Rav taught Torah to everybody. He taught Torah to that woman who was in the supermarket online trying to figure out how much milk she has to cook. It's unbelievable. Rav was the Rebbe. Rabbi shall kol b'nei Agoy means shall kol b'nei Agoy, I think. So he mamish taught Torah to every single Yid. Rav went to Dimcharia, he went to Aspatia, he went to Tatlafish. Rav is going to all these cities that he's teaching Torah. Maybe that's why Rav was Zoicha to Rav. What does that have to do with the first part of today's daf? But it's just interesting. So you think of Rav, the quintessential Mekarev, charismatic personality, $1 million smile. I'm not saying Rav didn't have $1 million smile, but the point is that Rav was a shaskin. Rav was like soch sicha b'teila kol yamav. Rav never looked outside of his daled amis. You have that sorry milah de chasidus that Rav was noyig, and afal pikein Rav was zoicha to be so mashpia. People think sometimes you have to have a certain personality to be mashpia on somebody else. Not true. Look at Rav. Rav is Rav. He's Rav and shel kol b'nei Agoyla. Rav is going ahead and he built cities and communities, and this is what Rav is doing. And Rav, how did he do it? In such a humble, quiet, understated way. Rav Talmud Rabbeinu HaKadosh Shaloi Sach Sicha B'Teila Kol Yamav. The way there's more to talk about, maybe another day.